All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into a story from the very end of World War II that, honestly, it sounds like something straight out of a Hollywood movie, but I promise you it's 100% true. We're talking about the day American GIs and German soldiers actually fought together on the same side defending a medieval castle from the last fanatical remnants of the Nazi regime.
So let's set the scene. It's the first week of May 1945. Hitler is dead in his bunker in Berlin. The Soviet flag is flying over the Reichstag. All across Europe, what's left of the German army is just laying down their weapons and surrendering en masse. I mean, the biggest, deadliest war in human history is basically finished. The fighting should be over.
But high up in the Austrian Alps, the war wasn't quite over. In fact, it was about to take this incredibly bizarre and frankly heroic final turn. This would lead to the only time in the entire war, at least that we have on record, that American soldiers and regular German soldiers fought as allies in a desperate last-ditch battle.
Now, to really get the story, you have to understand a super important difference inside the German military at this point. On one side, you have the Wehrmacht. That's the regular army. These guys were mostly conscripts, they were exhausted, totally defeated, and all they wanted to do was find some Americans to surrender to and just go home. But on the other side, you had the Waffen-SS. These were the true believers, the fanatics, loyal to Hitler even after he was dead. For them, surrender was a dirty word, and their final orders included executing any high-value prisoners so they couldn't be rescued. This distinction, it's everything to this story.
So, our whole story takes place at Castle Itter. You gotta picture this place. It's this gorgeous fortress. Looks like it's straight out of a fairy tale, sitting on a hill above a little Austrian village. But by 1945, that fairy tale look was hiding a pretty dark secret, and it was about to become the stage for one of the most unlikely battles in history. Yeah, see, back in 1943, the Nazis had turned Castle Itter into a prison. But not just any prison. It was basically a gilded cage, run by the same people who ran the Dachau concentration camp. The prisoners here weren't ordinary folks. They were a collection of France's most important people. We're talking former prime ministers, top generals, all being held by the Nazis as these valuable bargaining chips for negotiations that, well, never ended up happening.
So who was actually stuck inside this place? And maybe more importantly, who was going to answer their call for help? The group of people coming together at this castle, a mix of political enemies and soldiers from opposite armies, is what makes this whole thing so incredible. The prisoner list was a real who's who of pre-war France. And get this, a lot of them couldn't stand each other. You had two former prime ministers, Daladier and Renault, who literally blamed each other for France's fall in 1940. You had the former commander of the entire French army. And then, kind of randomly, you had Jean Borocha, a world-famous tennis star. So when the war was clearly over, their SS guards just took off, leaving them there. But now they were surrounded by those fanatical Waffen-SS troops we talked about, who were moving in with one order: kill all the prisoners.
A cook from the castle escaped on a bike with a desperate plea for help, and that's how two incredible men came together. First, U.S. Army Captain Jack Lee, a real tough-as-nails, cigar-chewing American tanker. He runs into Major Josef Gangl, a decorated German Wehrmacht officer who had come to hate the Nazis so much that he'd actually joined the local Austrian resistance, using his own soldiers to protect townspeople from the SS. Gangl walked up to Lee under a white flag with an unbelievable request: help me save the French VIPs from my own countrymen.
Captain Lee knew he couldn't wait for backup. He was actually under orders to stay put, but he made the call to go. He took his one Sherman tank, which had the amazing nickname Besotten Jenny, and just 7 of his guys, and joined up with Major Gangl and 10 of his German soldiers who had also chosen to do the right thing. So just think about that. This tiny, cobbled-together international force was the only thing standing between those prisoners and a firing squad. They made it to the castle just in the nick of time, and they parked that single tank right in the main gate to block it. Inside, they handed rifles to the French politicians, and as the sun came up on May 5th, the attack began. Somewhere between 150 and 200 Waffen-SS troops, armed with machine guns, mortars, and even an anti-aircraft cannon, launched a full-scale assault from the woods. Things went bad, fast. The tank, Besotten Jenny, was spitting machine gun fire, holding them off, until the SS rolled up their big gun, a powerful 88mm cannon. One shot slammed into the tank and took it out of the fight. The defenders were left with just their rifles. And inside, these French VIPs, some of them in their 70s, were fighting for their lives right alongside the Americans and the Germans. It was just a surreal, desperate fight that was only getting worse by the hour.
And
Right here, this moment, this is really the heart of the story. In the middle of all the chaos, Major Gangl saw the former French Prime Minister Reynaud standing out in the open, totally exposed. He ran to pull him back to cover, and in that exact second, an SS sniper's bullet hit Gangl in the head, and he was killed instantly. Just stop and think about that. A German officer had just died taking a bullet for a French politician he was technically supposed to call his enemy.
By the afternoon, the situation was absolutely critical. The tank was knocked out, Gangl was dead, their radio was smashed, and they were almost out of ammunition. Their very last hope was Jean Baratra, the tennis player. In this unbelievable act of bravery and athleticism, the bounding Basque literally vaulted over a 20-foot castle wall, dodged SS bullets, and ran for his life through the woods, trying to find the main American army and somehow convince them this crazy story was true. Back at the castle, around 4 p.m., it really looked like the end. The SS were at the main gate, planting explosives to blow it open for one final rush. With almost no bullets left, Captain Lee gave his last order to the mixed group of Americans and Germans. He told them, "Fix bayonets." They were getting ready for a last stand, to fight hand-to-hand in the courtyard.
And then, just as it seemed like it was all over, they heard a new sound. It wasn't gunfire, and it wasn't the explosion they were expecting at the gate. It was this deep, rumbling noise. The sound of heavy engines and tank treads. It was the sound of hope.
Bora Rutra, the tennis star, had made it. The American 142nd Infantry Regiment was here. And they didn't just show up. They came crashing into the rear of the SS attack force, catching them completely by surprise in a pincer move. The attackers were now the ones who were trapped. They broke, they scattered, and the siege was over. Can you just imagine the sight that greeted the rescuers? They saw American GIs in their uniforms, standing right next to German soldiers in theirs, shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of famous French politicians, all of them holding weapons, totally exhausted and covered in grime. One of the rescuing soldiers apparently just looked at the whole scene and asked, "What in the hell is going on here?"
So what you should really take away from this is how this one bizarre battle really defined the legacies of everyone there. Captain Jack Lee, who risked a court-martial for disobeying orders, was instead given the Distinguished Service Cross. The French VIPs were flown back to Paris to help rebuild their country. But maybe the most powerful legacy belongs to the man who didn't make it out.
Major Josef Gang is remembered today in Austria as a genuine hero of the anti-Nazi resistance. The very town he died defending, Wurgl, named a street in his honor. He's this incredible example of a person who, in the last chaotic moments of a horrible war, made a clear choice. He chose his conscience and our shared humanity over a hateful ideology he was once forced to serve.
And that kind of leaves us with one last big thought. By the strict rules of the army whose uniform he was wearing, Major Gangl was a traitor. He turned on his own side. But to the men he saved, and I think to history, he was a hero who made the ultimate sacrifice for what was right. It's just a powerful reminder that even in the darkest times, the lines we draw between enemy and ally can get blurry, and that real character is defined by the choices we make when everything is on the line.